God loves you.
God loves you.
Amen. Isn't it good to know that God loves us? It's a blessing to know that he loves us so much. The gospel of God's love. There's a story. In Memphis, Tennessee, not too far from here, there's a historic street, Tion, called Bill Street. In Bill Street, you see a lot of things. You see clubs, you see parties, you see even bars sometimes, but there's a bunch of restaurants there. But the ironic thing is, amidst all of the lights, amidst all of the action, amidst all of the people, everybody there is not the best shape. There actually are some people around there that are beggars, who, if you go there, they'll not look too well, not smell too well, and not be in the best condition of living. Some of them are even homeless. And one day, two beggars were talking around Bill Street, and one said to the other, he said, "Why are you smiling? What's wrong with you? Don't you realize that we are beggars and that we are poor and that we don't have anything?" And he said to him, he said, "I may be a beggar, I may be poor, but I just ate the best meal of my life." He said, "And if you'll follow me, I hear they have enough for you as well." And so both went together to the restaurant and ate together, and there was more than enough to go around, so they kept bringing in more beggars. And that's all the gospel is, brothers and sisters. It's one beggar telling another where to find food. Because whether we like it or not, we are all poor in spirit. Because the Bible says in Psalms chapter 51 that we are all born in sin and shaped in iniquity. Therefore, we are such as filthy rags before him. And because of that, dear brothers, I just want to talk about the gospel of God's love. This is an epistle. An epistle is a letter written by a pastor. And the pastor that wrote this letter, his name is Paul. Many of us have heard of Paul before, but in case you have not, Paul's name was originally Saul. He was not an original church member. He actually hated the church. And on top of hating the church, he persecuted the church. He killed people. He jailed people. And yet, some kind of way, God still loved him enough to meet up with him on the Damascus Road. Jesus met him in person, changed his life, and he went from persecutor to preacher. He went from enemy to friend, and he went from malicious intent to missionary intent. And he is known as one of the greatest scholars of all time, one of the greatest preachers of all time, and one of the greatest church planners of all time. And Paul wrote to the church in Rome because he wanted them to know that the only way you can really get a picture of an invisible God is to look at the visible portrait of him. He established what's called Christocentric doctrine. Christocentric, the big word, actually only means two things. It's a compound word, Christ and centric. In other words, Christ-centered. He said the only way that you can actually see what God looks like and see how his personality is if you look at his son, Jesus. And so he writes about Jesus, and he tells them that Jesus is the one with whom we look into Jesus and we see the love of God. So what happens is in chapters 1 through 4 of this text, contextually and pretextually, in chapter 1, verse 16, Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it's the power of God for salvation to everyone that believes. And he starts there, and he takes a left turn, and he starts talking about how messed up humanity is. Starts talking about how messed up the country is. Starts talking about how messed up people are and how mean and how sinful and how hateful people are to each other. And brothers and sisters, though this book was written almost 2,000 years ago, we're still just like that. I woke up this morning, Mike, to bad news, because I saw on my phone, I get the news that comes to my phone, and there's been a bombing in London. They bombed a train, the underground rail station. They bombed it. Little girl gets locked and killed in a freezer. Cop that shoots and kills a man in St. Louis walks off scot-free. People that are murdering each other, hating each other, talking about each other, bashing each other. The world is in bad shape. We're all hateful. We either know somebody hateful or we have been hateful at one point in time. So what happened is Paul writes about this because he says there's not one good person in the world. As a matter of fact, in chapter number 3, he says there's not one righteous person in the world, no, not one. And then he goes on and he says, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. For 4 chapters, hardly he gives us bad news. Because then he tells us if sin wasn't bad enough, he tells us that the wages of sin is death. My Lord. So he literally says to us, he says, because you're a sinner, you deserve to die.
That's right.
Because you're a sinner, you deserve to be killed and burn in hell for all eternity. And so my question, Sister Dot, was, well, how can I get out of it? Maybe I can, work my way out of sin and do a few good deeds, give to charity, or, help the poor, feed the orphans, or do something like that, give to disaster relief, and maybe I can get into heaven. But unfortunately, Jackson, I found out that's not true. Actually, it doesn't matter how good of a person I am. Without Jesus, I'm still a sinner.
That's right. Come on.
And I said, well, how long has this been going on? And I found out that even though this was written in Romans after Jesus had already died and been raised, that sin actually started in Genesis chapter 3.
Come on,
and it's been passed down like genes through our blood over the years. So everyone in this room is a sinner.
That's right.
No matter if you've been saved for 30, 40 years or not saved at all, you're still a sinner. And so he goes on and he gives us so much bad news. But then he turns it around in chapter number 4 at the end and he says that Abraham was justified through faith.
That's right.
And it was credited to him righteousness. So he says you're guilty, but there's a way that you can be acquitted. There's a way that you can actually be innocent. And that way is faith in Jesus Christ. And so when he says this, I'm perplexed because it says, okay, so even though I'm a sinner and an enemy of God, if I have faith in God's Son, he makes me innocent.
Come on, Brad.
How simple is that? All I have to do is believe in Jesus and I can be saved from sin. All I have to do is believe in Jesus, confess my belief, and I can be saved and go to heaven where I'm never losing another family member to death. I'm never losing another teammate to death. I'm never crying anymore. I'm never hungry. I'm never thirsty. I'm never going without. I always have a roof over my head. Everything's good. Sun is always shining. Everything's pretty. Everything's beautiful. All I have to do to get there is believe in Jesus.
That's right.
So he says in chapter number 5, verse 1, as we get to the text, he says, therefore, having been justified through Jesus Christ, we now have obtained peace with God. What does that mean? Peace with God. He literally implies that with sin, we're enemies of God.
Well,
but God saved his enemies. That's crazy. I don't like my enemies. I sure wouldn't, try to help them. But God loved me enough that while I was an enemy, he loved me and made me peaceful with him.
well,
Only thing you have to do to have that peace with God is believe in Jesus. And so as we get to the text says, brothers and sisters, it says, but God demonstrates his love toward us, comma, in that while we were yet sinners, comma, Christ died for us, period. The gospel in Greek is euangelion.
yes, sir.
Say that, euangelion. It's a Greek word. All it means is good news. The good news about God's love. Now, this is not the love that we know. You know, the love we know is how you feel about somebody. Affection and feelings and love. That's philo love or eros love, the love for a husband to a wife. That's not the love we're talking about. We're talking about agape love. What agape love is unconditional love. You know, unconditional, that prefix un meaning without or in lack of or absent from conditions. Meaning, Tion, if I was wanting you to do something, I say, I'll give you something if you do something for me.
Come on, Brad. All right.
I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. I'll give you gas in your car when we go on the trip in your car if you'll give me gas in my car when we go in my car. That's conditions. Based on conditions, that's how much I'll support you. But God says that his love for us is unconditional, which means that even when we don't do anything for him, he still does something for us. So some of us today was like, okay, why am I coming to church? Why is it so important to come to church? I really, I could be doing something else right now. I could be getting ready for the football game on TV. I could be at it's a little dusty on the roads. I could be at the car wash washing my car, get real shiny because I'm going to Jacksonville. I could do all of these things, but we're coming to church because we're celebrating God's unconditional love.
That's right.
Because even your friends don't love you unconditionally.
That's right.
Even your family members, most of them, don't love you unconditionally. The only ones that can get close to loving you unconditionally is the love of a mother and father. But even sometimes relationships between mothers and fathers and their children are bad. And it doesn't feel like love is there. We've either been there or we know somebody that's there. But the good news is that even when our own physical parents don't show us the love that we'd like to have based on conditions, even when they get mad with us and turn us off, as some of us have been through, God loves us enough to love us through our problems.
That's right.
So the text says that, but God demonstrates his own love toward us. So we see three things of good news about God's love. The first thing we see is in that A clause. He says in the A clause, but God demonstrates love toward us. First thing we see is the contrast of God's love. The contrast of God's love. Contrast, but God. But God, or but, is a conjunction.
That's right.
It's a contrasting conjunction. You have connecting conjunctions like and. You have conditional conjunctions like or. And then you have contrasting conjunctions like but. What a contrasting conjunction does is everything before it goes in a different direction when but comes into play.
Oh, yeah.
Meaning, for 4 chapters, he's given us bad news about how messed up we are.
That's right. Make it plain.
But when he says, but God, bad news changes to good news.
Yes.
In other words, he saves the best for last. When you say, I got good news and I got bad news, which one you want to hear first? Most of us will say, give me the bad news first so I can feel better later. And so he gives us all the bad news about our sin, and then he says, but God.
My Lord.
Now, most of us, when we're very spiritual, we can get happy on those but God moments. Because all of us, whether we like it or not to admit it, have experienced a but God moment.
That's right.
I'll give you an example. I was driving down the street one day and I saw a wreck on the side of me. But by the grace of God, I was not involved in the car wreck.
That's right.
That's a but God moment.
Yes, it is.
Another time I saw someone who was having an eviction notice on their house. But God made a way for them to not only have that house, but now they bought another house. And they're renting that one out. That's a but God moment. I've even been in a place where I was told that my own leg would be amputated because the wreck that I had was so bad that they didn't figure anybody could fix what was wrong with my leg. But God allowed some military physician to be at the hospital that day, and he said, no, I think I can fix that. I've seen like that in battle. That's a but God moment. But even in the midst of sin, all the wages of sin is death, and we're all sinners, which means we all should die because we're all guilty, but God. That's the best part, when you don't love God, but God loves you. When you don't live right, but God treats you right. When you don't support God, but God supports you. When you don't provide for God, do what he asks you to do, but God provides for you. That's a but God moment. So he says, but God. Then the next word he uses is very crazy to me. He says, demonstrates his love toward us. That's the contrast, because he literally says, Jay, God shows us love instead of just tell us.
Come on.
You know, we got some people who tell you I love you. You can't really tell. You say you love me, but you cussing me out. You say you love me, but you're beating me upside the head. You say you love me, but when I'm not around you and you're with some other people, you're talking about me behind my back. You say you love me, but when you see me out of gas on the side of the road, you drive by and wave because you got something more important to do. That's not love. But God demonstrates his love. He didn't just show, he didn't just tell it, he showed it. All of us have been in kindergarten at one point in time, and in kindergarten we had something called show and tell. We tell what we want to be, and we come having some kind of prop that showed this is what I want to be because, and we explain how we showed it to be what it was. God shows us his love. How? Because the biggest demonstration of love is sacrifice. A child knows how much mom and daddy love because mom and daddy will go without to make sure the child has. Okay. Love causes you to sacrifice some things. Because whether we like to admit it or not, we all want to be loved. But we all don't feel loved all the time. Because to sacrifice means that you have to give up something. And that means you have to put somebody else before you.
That's right.
Most of us are selfish people. We want all the stuff for us, but we really don't want to give to somebody else. And that's why this is contrasting, because he says God does what no other person in the world does.
My Lord.
He'll sacrifice himself for you. In the verse leading up to this, verse number 7, he says somebody might die for a good person. But he says Christ died for bad people. People like us. Christ died for ungodly people, unholy people, unrighteous people. You know, I'm not going to take a bullet for a criminal. I'll take a bullet for my child. Take a bullet for my parent. Somebody who I view has done a great job in my life, my spouse or somebody close to me. I might take a bullet for them. Might. You know, in the hand or the leg or something. Not in the head. That's your bullet. You're going to have to go get that yourself. Not in the chest. No, you're going to have to take that bullet. That's your whooping. You're going to take that. I'm going to just watch. I see you in heaven. Goodbye. Talk to you later. Tell God I see it like a while. You go on and do that. But that's for people we really, really, really love. And we're only going to give up a little bit. God sacrificed his child to save you. That's real love. I don't know any mother or father who would willingly allow their child to die. If they could do anything to prevent it, I'm sure no parent would like to bury their child. But definitely wouldn't give their child up for an enemy. Somebody who curses you. Somebody who hates you. Somebody who doesn't even acknowledge that you exist. All he says is devote one day of the week to worshiping me. And most of us, on Super Bowl Sunday, will give Super Bowl more attention and worship than we give God.
Wow.
I said most of us, so y'all don't get mad at me. I said us, so that includes me. Because I end the sermon quick because I know I got to be at the house in time for the game to start.
Tell on yourself, Rev.
That's me.
My
That's me. Because I like football. You'll give up a lot, but God has given you more than you can ever handle.
That's right.
And he says, all I want you to do is love me because of it. And so he says, but God demonstrates his love for us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died. Not only do we see the contrast, but there's a comma that comes after that contrast. He says, but God demonstrates his love toward us, comma. Watch this. He literally says, we're resting in the love of God.
Watch it, Rev. Yeah.
Because a comma signifies rest.
That's right.
He literally says that even in your ungodly, bad, messed up, sinful state, when you go to sleep at night, the reason you're able to get rest is because God provides it for you.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
The reason that you have dreams instead of nightmares every night of your life is because God gives you rest. The reason you're supposed to wake up every day energized and renewed and refreshed, and you don't have a bullet coming through your house, even though a bullet went through your neighborhood, is because God gives you rest. You can rest on the love of God. But then after he gives the contrast, he says, but God, while we were yet sinners. You see that? In that, while we were yet sinners, another comma. After we see the contrast in God's love, we see the timing in God's love. Contrast, because he's different. He loves us different than anybody ever could. But then we see the timing. Watch what it says. While we were yet sinners. You see that?
Yeah.
While we were yet sinners. Somebody shout, wow.
Wow.
While is a preposition. A preposition means that this is leading into something or introducing a state of mind.
Yeah.
While we were yet sinners, in other words, while we were still enemies, God loved us.
My Lord.
While we were still enemies, God loved us. Now let this sink in for a minute. While we were still enemies, God loved us.
Come on.
There's a phrase that people use in church doors a lot. Now it says, well, I'll come to church when I get myself right. When I get myself together, or, when I get better. But the blessing and the good news of God's love is he doesn't wait on you to get yourself better. He loves you while you're in it.
Yes, thank you.
The text says, while we were yet sinners. That yet means still at the present moment.
My God.
Meaning, while you were in the place you shouldn't have been, doing something you shouldn't have done, with people you shouldn't have been with, he still loves you. While you were doing wrong, he still loved you. Even though you don't pray to him, he still loves you. Even though you don't worship him because you don't see why it takes all that, he still loves you. Even while you say, God, I hate you. God, you don't even exist because I can't see you. God, you're not even real. Because if you were real, you wouldn't allow such stuff to happen. Even in that time, God says, I love you anyway. Even while you fight with God and say, I don't want to do the right thing. While you murder, steal, hate, gossip, all of those things that we do that are wrong, he loved us anyway.
That's right.
But now watch what it says. While we were yet sinners, and another comma. While we were resting in sin, we were still resting in our love. While we were asleep in our sin, God still let us rest in his love. Meaning, literally, Mike, the only way that you are alive today is because God loved you enough. The only way some of us were able to get to church, to get saved when we did. And the only reason that we were able to live throughout all the mess that we did was because God loved us. The reason we didn't die in that accident and God gave us another chance to live is because he loved us.
That's right. That's right.
Who wouldn't want to worship a God like that? When you can be messed up and God still loves you, that's love. He says God didn't wait. He gave it to you when you didn't deserve it, when you weren't working for it, when you really didn't even want it. But not even that. After the contrast and after the timing, the C clause of verse 8. Look what it says. Christ died for us. Text in whole says, but God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Here's the pronouns that he uses. Us, we, us. These are inclusive or inductive pronouns. Inclusive means everybody's a part. Keep in mind, this is a pastor writing this letter. He says, even pastors sin. Even pastors make mistakes.
That's right.
Even people that's been saved all of their lives, that's been saved 30 and 40 years, who serve on different boards in the church, everybody in this room is a sinner.
All right.
Now, most of us didn't say amen. Because a lot of us don't like to admit those type things. Because we like to front when we're at church like we're so holy. We like to play like we got it all together. But you worry about how you're going to make ends meet. That's sin. Worrying is sin. You're stressed out and you don't know what to do and you go to everybody else but God first. That's sin. You don't rest when you're supposed to rest. When God says, keep the Sabbath day holy and rest on that day. That's sin. You steal the little pen out of the ATM machine when you go to the bank teller. That's stealing. That's sin. You talk about people on social media and joke on them, expose them, connive them, and kill them, and cut them with your words. That's sin. You covet because you want everything that somebody else has and you're not content with what God has blessed you with. That's sin. You lie because you say that you go with somebody that you don't go with. Say that you know somebody you don't know. Say you live somewhere that you don't live. Say you got something you don't have. That's sin. You hate your mother and father because you don't respect them, you don't honor them. You say, yeah, no, and you do all of these different things. You talk to them in a kind of way, treat them in a kind of way. That's sin. We ain't got all 10 yet. But just those, everybody in here is guilty of it. Meaning we all should be dead. But even in the midst of that, the text says, as he gives us the compassion, Christ died for us. Now, that word means that everybody in here is in the same boat. Everybody in here is a sinner. All of us. That word sin, it goes around everything. You know, we have some words that are not cross-cultural. We have some words that are not cross-economic status words. Only poor people deal with those things, or only rich people deal with those things, or only black people, or only white people. Sin is cross everything. That's right. It doesn't matter where you're from, where you live, what school you go to, how much education you have, GED to PhD, you still got sin. That's right. It doesn't matter if you're black, white, Asian, African, wherever you're from, even Korea, you still got sin. All of us are sinful. But the good news is, just like that beggar who said, come see somebody who can feed you, who got more than enough to go around, even as much sin as we have in this room, God has more than enough love for that. Yes. And so he gives us the compassion because he says, Christ died for us. Now that word for implies two things. One, he died to save us. He died to save us. The only way that we can be saved from our sin, Sam, is that he died for us. He'd have to do it for us so that we could be back to him. Reconciliation. But the best part I like about it is that he died for us. Not only did he die for us, but he died for us. Let me give you the difference. One death on 4 was the fact that he died to save us and bring him to himself. The other side of 4 is a substitution. Tori, you know what a substitution is, don't you? When you can't do something, you can't hit the ball, or you can't run that time, or you can't shoot that time, they make a substitution.
That's right.
We're going to take you out, sit you right here, let you rest, and somebody else is going to take your place.
That's right.
And take that hit. Somebody else is going to take your place and run that race. That's a substitution. He literally says he died to be your substitute. Because either way, the wage of sin is death.
Yes, sir.
The rules don't change. The wage of sin is death. Somebody has to die. He literally just said, I'll do it for you. I'll let you live. I'll die in your place. All I need you to do is love me. All I need you to do is believe in me. All I need you to do is support me. And I'll take your place so you don't have to die. Most people know the story of the cross. We know about the thorns that they put in his head. We know about the nails they put in his wrist. We know about the rivet, the spike that they used to drive his 2 feet together, one on top of the other, into wood. We know about the beating that they took iron and pieces of bone and pieces of steel and metal and glass and swiped it across his back 40 times till the skin ripped off. We know about that. We know about the fact that they spit in his eye, that they literally hung him on a tree, which made him die of suffocation because his bones and lungs and rib cage was pulled out. But he did it because you were going to have to. You were supposed to be on that cross.
That's right.
I was supposed to be on that cross. It was supposed to be us with a crown of thorns, going through mental pain because it felt like if it wasn't one thing bothering this side of our head, something was bothering this side, something was bothering here. All that mental stress, he took it.
Yes, yes.
Feeling like life has beat us over the top, whooped us, and we're burdened down. He said, I'll take that too.
That's right. That's right.
Feeling like we're overwhelmed by life because we're suffocated. We can't even breathe because it seems like we're drowning in all of our sorrows. He said, I'll take that too.
Come on here.
Give it all to me and I'll take it so you don't have to do none of it.
Come on.
That's the gospel. So as I close, I'm reminded of a story. I'm going to get out your way. There's a story about this young girl. She had turned 16. She got a new car. And she drives in a place called Butts County, Georgia.
Yeah.
Real small place, real country, you know, like around here. He goes and she gets in the car and she's driving and she's on the interstate 1 minute and then she gets to town. The only issue is when you're on the interstate, the speed limit is high. But when you get to those little small towns, it drops drastically.
That's right.
You can be going 75 1 minute and the next thing you know, the speed limit is 35. Well, she drove past the sign and she was doing 75 and 35. Next thing she knows, she sees blue lights. Police stops her and says, ma'am, you were speeding. You're breaking the law. You gotta go to court. You gotta pay for this ticket. This ticket is $160. She's 16, she doesn't even have a job. Just got a car. She has not $160. So she goes to court, she stands in front of the judge, and the judge says, you are charged with being guilty of speeding through a 35-mile-an-hour zone. What do you say? I'm guilty. He says, okay, you either pay $100 now, pay $60 later, pay $160 now, or you go to jail now. Pick one. She says, sir, I don't have $100. I don't have $160, but I really don't want to go to jail. Can I get out of this some kind of way? He says, the law is the law. She says, well, sir, I didn't realize that I was going so fast. He said, ignorance is not innocence.
All right.
He said, well, you know, I'm just a little girl. He says, but you're still guilty.
Well.
She used every excuse she could come up with. He said, the law is the law. You have to be punished for breaking the law. She said, sir, is there nothing else you can do? I'm begging you, have mercy on me. He looks at her. He stands up from his judge's seat, unzips his judge robe, walks down beside her, picks up his jacket, puts it on, pulls out $160, lays it on the table, takes his jacket off, walks back up to his judge's seat, zips his robe back up, and he says, the law is the law. You have to pay for it. But wait, I see somebody's already paid.
Come on here. Come on.
That's the gospel.
That's right.
How? Because we don't have enough money to pay for our sin. We can't go to hell and come back and make it out. Come on now. To pay for our sin.
That's right.
So God, in his judge uniform, took off his robe of deity,
I like that breath.
walked down through 42 generations,
That's right.
put on his jacket of humanity, stayed with us for 33 long years, took out of his wallet of grace one hand to a nail, one hand to another nail, 2 feet to a rivet, a back to a whip, a head to crowns, and a body to a cross, and died. And then after he died and the debt was paid, he was buried for us.
That's right.
But 3 days later,
Yes, sir.
he gets back up, goes back up to heaven, and puts back on his judge suit and says, I see somebody's already paid. That's the gospel of God's love. The contrast is he did what nobody else would do. The timing is he did it when nobody else could do it. And the compassion is he did what nobody else would do. We extend the invitation. I'm through.